Hi guys, it's Lou. I'm back for my second video today. I don't usually do two videos in one day. But this video today came as a result of, I was watching a video a couple of days ago from Steve Whitty, who I subscribe to, and Steve was showing some CD finds, and a couple of the CDs he showed were debut albums of bands. One of them was, I think it's called Employment by the Kaiser Chiefs, and the other one is Franz Ferdinand's debut album. And we got into a little bit of a discussion about, you know, how so many bands and artists, how a lot of times their strongest album is their debut album. And Steve made a comment about, you know, I think you guys have heard it before, you know, how you have your whole life to write your first album, but your second album, you know, you only have 6 months, or it seemed rushed or something like that. So we started talking about how, you know, it would be an interesting thread to see, you know, what examples we could come up with of artists whose second albums are actually better or more preferred than their first albums. And Steve did his video earlier today, and I won't break the surprise. Go over to his channel and watch his video of what album he used as an example for that. I'm going to show 3 albums that I think that the second album is the better album of those particular artists. The first one, David Bowie. So this album, my copy is known as Space Oddity, but I think originally when this album came out, it was in 1969, and it was just a self-titled David Bowie. I think this then got re-released maybe a couple of years later and got named Space Oddity because the you know, the big hit off the album is Space Oddity. And David Bowie's first album was actually in 1967, also a self-titled album, and a much different album. And I think there's certainly an audience for that first David Bowie album, and some people really, really love that album. But I think the general sentiment is that this album, whether you call it David Bowie or Space Oddity, is much more popular than that first album. Excuse me. This again obviously has the big hit and has much more of a rockier sound. The first David Bowie album, the songs, I find the songs, like personally, I'm only speaking for myself, I don't own a copy of that album, but I find the songs on that album to be a little bit, I don't know if silly is the right word, but almost like at times children's type songs or novelty songs. And I've seen and read lots of other opinions where people feel generally that same kind of feeling, and that's why I think this album is regarded as a much stronger album than the first David Bowie album, the debut. But again, certainly there's an audience for that first album, and there's some people that absolutely love that first album, and kudos to you if you're one of them. For me, this album is a much better album, but again, that's just my opinion. The next couple of bands that I'm going to show, it's debatable actually whether the second album is better than the first album, and I personally think that the second album is a little bit better than these bands' first albums, but I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that actually believe that the first album, the debut album, is a better album. This band, everybody knows, Cream. Their first album is Fresh Cream. Their second album is Disraeli Gears. Now, I love both albums. Both albums are fantastic albums, and I think they're the 2 best albums that this band put out. They only put out 4 albums in total, but certainly to me they are the 2 best albums. Fresh Cream being much more of a blues rock album, has many more cover songs, some great covers, mind you. You got Spoonful, I'm So Glad, 4 Until Late, what else does it have? Rolling and Tumbling. It's an amazing album. I love that album. But I think Disraeli Gears is better. There's much less covers on this album, And this album obviously has the monster hit Sunshine of Your Love. It also has Tales of Brave Ulysses, Strange Brew, a much more psychedelic album, and quite different in sound, both being hard albums. But you know, this one came out in 1967. Fresh Cream came out just the year before in 66. But certainly this album went much more in the direction of a psychedelic rock sound. And I think most people would say that Disraeli Gears is the better album. But again, I think both albums are fantastic and you should have both in your collection. The next band from the 90s, and I think you'll get a lot of debate on this one, to say that maybe the first album, the debut album, is better than the second album. So the debut album is definitely Maybe from Oasis. And the second album is, of course, What's the Story, Morning Glory. Now for me, What's the Story, Morning Glory may just edge out definitely Maybe. And again, it may even depend the mood that I'm in. The only reason that I'm saying that this might slightly be the better album is when you look at the singles released from both albums. I think as far as chart success goes, and I think chart success mainly in the UK, you've got a lot of #1 singles from What's the Story, Morning Glory. I believe Some Might Say, Wonderwall, Don't Look Back in Anger. I believe all those songs might have made #1 or close to #1. You also have Roll With It that I know made #2. You've also got Champagne Supernova. This album is littered with singles that were extremely popular. And overall, as an album, I think Morning Glory was also a single, the title track as well. Such an amazing album beginning to end. I think you'd call this a perfect album. Definitely Maybe, on the other hand, I think you can also call a perfect album. Amazing songs like Supersonic, Rock and Roll Star, Live Forever. You got some amazing songs on there, Shaker Maker. Again, both these albums should be in your collection. I think if you have to pick one a little bit over the other, more times than not, I'm going to pick What's the Story, Morning Glory. But again, there might be some days where I think definitely Maybe is the better of the two albums. But certainly a case can be made here that the first two Oasis albums are easily and far and above the remainder of the albums. Be Here Now is an okay album, but I think is not in the league of Morning Glory and definitely Maybe. So again, what do you guys think? And if you want to make comments on these albums, on which ones you think are the better albums, and if you've got any examples of where you think that the artist's or band's second album is better than the first album, love to hear your comments and love to see any videos out there. Okay, thanks a lot, guys.